At the reading of my wife's will, my son-in-law spoke in a cold tone. "I'll take the business, the house, and the car. The old useless guy can deal with the taxes." Some people in the room laughed at me until the lawyer said, "Actually, the company was never in her name. It was registered under another name." I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end and write the city you're watching from so I can know how far my story has gone. My name is Donald and I'm 64 years old. I never imagined the worst day of my life would come after I had already buried my wife. The funeral home had the smell of lilies and regret. Margaret had been gone for 3 days, and I still couldn't accept that she wasn't coming back. 42 years of marriage, and now I was sitting in a leather chair that made a small noise every time I moved, surrounded by people who hadn't talked to me in months. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He was a thin man with gray hair and a serious face that made you feel like admitting things you hadn't even done. Margaret had chosen him many years ago, and I never questioned it. I never really questioned anything Margaret decided. We are here today for the reading of Margaret Ann Mitchell's last will and testament, Henderson started, his voice echoing slightly in the small meeting room. My daughter Ava sat across from me, her eyes swollen from crying. At 38, she still reminded me of the little girl who used to sit in my lap when she was afraid of storms, but that time was long gone. Beside her sat Martin, my son-in-law, checking his phone like he had somewhere more important to be. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than all the clothes I bought in a year. Martin had always looked at me like I was something stuck under his shoe. Even now, with Margaret barely buried, he couldn't hide his impatience. He kept looking at his watch and letting out heavy sighs. The deceased has left clear instructions about how her assets should be divided, Henderson continued. I noticed he didn't look directly at anyone. Maybe he already knew how this would go. My hands were shaking, so I pressed them against my knees, hoping no one would see. The truth was, I had no idea what Margaret had arranged. We had been married for decades, but she always managed the business matters. I just followed her lead. Martin leaned forward, suddenly interested. How long will this take? I have a conference call at 4. Ava gently touched his arm. Martin, please, this matters. He pulled his arm away. Important, yes. But we all know how this ends. Margaret built everything from nothing. She had the vision and the drive, not like some people who just drift along. The way he said it, and the quick glance he gave me, made my stomach tighten. I stayed quiet. What was the use of arguing? Martin had made his opinion of me very clear years ago. Henderson shuffled his papers. Mrs. Mitchell owned Mitchell Consulting Services, the family house on Maple Street, 2 rental homes, and other assets adding up to about $2.7 million. I heard Ava quietly gasp. Even I was shocked by that number. I knew Margaret had done well, but I didn't realize it was that much. Martin straightened up like a dog catching a smell. $2.7 million. That's right, Henderson confirmed. My son-in-law looked almost excited. I could see him calculating everything in his head, thinking about what this meant for his lifestyle, his image, his future. He had always cared about money and status. That's why I believed he married Ava. She was beautiful and came from what he thought was a successful family. Now, Henderson went on, regarding how these assets will be distributed. Martin interrupted again. Let's just get to the point. I'll take control of the business. Ava and I will move into the Maple Street house. It's better for the kids, more space, bigger yard. We can rent out Donald's place and add it to the rental income. He spoke like everything was already decided, like I wasn't even there. Martin? Ava said softly, but he ignored her. What? We all know how this works. Margaret was the one who earned everything. She built it all from the ground up. While Donald here, he motioned toward me without respect. Let's just say some people build things and some people don't. The room went quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner. My face felt hot with shame. This was right after Margaret's funeral, and Martin was already dividing her life like it was something to be shared casually. Henderson looked uneasy. Maybe we should continue with the official reading. Martin leaned back, a proud smile on his face. Of course, he said. I'm just being practical. The old useless man can keep paying the property taxes on whatever small part he gets. That can be his contribution to the family for once. Ava's face turned pale. Martin stopped. But he kept going, enjoying his own harsh words. Let's be honest, what has Donald ever done? Margaret did all the work, made all the money, built everything. He just existed, taking up space. A few of Margaret's relatives, people I barely knew, actually laughed. They laughed at me while my wife had only just been buried. I wanted to defend myself, to say something, anything. But what could I say? That for 42 years I watched Margaret succeed while I slowly felt like I was fading away. That I spent years feeling unimportant, unnecessary, exactly what Martin described. Dead weight. The laughter faded and Martin looked straight at me. Don't take it personally, Donald. Everyone has their role. Margaret was the achiever. You were there. Henderson cleared his throat again, louder this time. If I may continue reading. Please, Martin said, sitting back like he was waiting to hear about his new empire. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. 64 years old. And this is what my life had become. A joke. A burden. The old, useless man who should be thankful for whatever little peace he was given. Henderson opened the will and started reading. I, Margaret Ann Mitchell, being of sound mind and body. But I wasn't really listening. My thoughts were somewhere else. I was thinking about how I had failed, how I had let my wife down, my daughter down, myself down. I remembered all the times Martin made small comments, all the family events where I felt like I didn't belong in my own home. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just an old man who had been lucky to marry someone better. Regarding Mitchell Consulting Services and all business interests, Henderson continued. I closed my eyes and waited for the final embarrassment. But then he said something that made me look up. Something that changed everything. Actually, there seems to be some confusion here. His words stayed in the air, but my mind went somewhere else. Somewhere darker, back to all the moments that led me to this room, sitting in this chair, being treated like something nobody wanted but couldn't throw away. I remembered the first time Martin looked at me like that. It was 7 years ago at Ava's wedding. I was walking her down the aisle, trying not to cry, when I saw Martin's family in the front row. His father owned 3 car dealerships. His mother wore diamonds that shined in the church lights. They looked at me like I was just staff. After the ceremony, Martin's father, Robert, pulled me aside. So, Donald, what do you do? I told him I helped my wife with her consulting business, feeling proud of Margaret. He smiled, but it didn't feel real. Help how? I struggled to explain, saying something about office work and support. The truth was more complicated, but he didn't wait to hear it. Well, he said, patting my shoulder, it's good Margaret found her path. Some people are naturally good at business. The meaning was clear. I was not one of them. That night after the reception, I found Ava crying in the hotel bathroom. She was still in her wedding dress, her makeup running. Dad, she said when she saw me, I'm afraid I made a mistake. I held her while she cried and told her that marriage can feel scary, that Martin loved her. But deep inside, I had already seen how he looked at success, how much he wanted status and recognition. I had seen the way he looked at me. The years after that proved I was right. Martin treated our family get-togethers like they were business events. He would spend the whole time talking about his job, his promotions, and everything he had achieved. When people asked about me, he would quickly change the topic or make jokes about retired life, even though I was nowhere close to retirement age. Donald's our family philosopher, he'd say with that laugh that made my skin crawl. Always thinking deep thoughts, right, Don? He made it sound like thinking was something only people did when they didn't have real work to handle. The hardest part wasn't even Martin's attitude. It was watching Ava slowly change. My daughter, who used to call me every Sunday just to talk, began making excuses. She was busy with Martin's work events, his family's plans, and their new circle of friends who worked in finance, law, and other impressive-sounding jobs. "You understand, don't you, Dad?" she would say when she canceled our lunch plans for the third time in a single month. "Martin's boss is hosting a dinner, and it's really important for his career." I always told her I understood. What else was I supposed to say? Margaret tried to bring everyone closer. She would invite them over for dinner, arrange family trips, and buy expensive gifts for their kids. But even she started to change over time. She would get defensive when Martin made his comments, almost like she felt embarrassed by me, too. "Donald works very hard," she would say, but her voice sounded tired, like she was exhausted from always having to defend me. The breaking point came 2 years ago at Christmas. We were all gathered at our house, and Martin was telling everyone about his newest promotion. He was a regional sales manager now, earning 6 figures and driving a company car. "It's funny," he said, looking around the room with that familiar smile, "how life works out. Some people have that drive, that hunger for success, and others—" He glanced at me, sitting in my usual chair near the window. "Others are happy just existing." Margaret's sister, Linda, laughed. "Well, not everyone can be a go-getter like you, Martin." "That's true," Martin replied. "Take Donald here. 50 years of what exactly? I mean, what would you even put on a resume? Professional husband?" The room filled with laughter. Everyone except Ava, who stared down at her hands, and Margaret, who suddenly seemed very interested in her wine glass. I quietly excused myself and went down to the basement. I sat there for 2 hours, listening to the party continue above me, wondering when I had become the joke of the family. When everyone finally left that night, Margaret came downstairs to find me. "Don," she said softly, "you know he doesn't mean it, right? He's just insecure. Successful people often are." I wanted to ask her if she was embarrassed by me too, if she ever wished she had married someone more like Martin, someone who matched her ambition and energy. But I was too afraid to hear the answer. So instead, I just nodded and said, "I know." But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't understand anything anymore. The reality was, I had been fading away for years. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I had become invisible in my own life, just a background character in everyone else's story. Margaret was the successful businesswoman. Ava was the loving daughter and mother. Martin was the rising star. And me, I was the quiet, lazy man who paid the bills and tried not to get in anyone's way. Sitting in that lawyer's office, listening to Martin plan out my future like I was some piece of property to be handled, I realized this was how things would always be. Even after Margaret was gone, even after 42 years of marriage, I was still just the background figure, still the man who stayed quiet while others made the important decisions. Martin kept talking, going on about property management and tax details. Henderson was moving papers around, looking more uncomfortable by the second. Ava was staring out the window, probably wishing she could be anywhere else. And I sat there, remembering every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment someone made me feel like I didn't belong. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really was just a burden. But then Henderson spoke again, and something in his tone made me pay attention. "I'm afraid there's been a serious misunderstanding here." His voice cut through the room cleanly. The rustling of papers stopped. Martin's confident speech ended in the middle of a sentence. Even Ava turned away from the window, her attention now fixed on the lawyer. "I'm sorry," Martin said, his tone changing from relaxed confidence to clear irritation. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Henderson removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. I had seen that move before during business meetings with Margaret. It was the kind of pause that meant something big was coming. I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Something else. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Henderson opened a thick folder and took out a document. According to the corporate records I have here, Mitchell Consulting Services was never actually owned by Margaret Mitchell. The air in the room felt heavy. Martin's face turned pale, then red, then pale again. That's impossible. You're reading it wrong. I assure you, these documents are correct. Henderson held up a certificate. Mitchell Consulting Services, established in 1981, is fully owned by Donald Mitchell Holdings, LLC. My heart started beating faster. I knew that name, of course. I just hadn't heard it spoken out loud in so many years that it sounded strange in this room. In this moment, Martin stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Donald Mitchell Holdings? What the hell is Donald Mitchell Holdings? Henderson looked at me, really looked at me, with something close to respect. Perhaps Mr. Mitchell would like to explain. All eyes turned toward me. Ava's eyes were wide with confusion. Martin's were tight with suspicion. I could feel their stares waiting for me to speak, to explain, to justify myself. But I stayed silent for a moment.